Chapter 18 When Pretty Boy Died. The next evening at dinner was quiet. Not the good quiet, where you're all thinking your own thoughts and smiling at each other, but the bad quiet, where you're walking on eggshells, even though the mean words are still in your head. I was mad at Daddy for sending Judy away, and mad at Mother for not standing up to him. For their part, my parents seemed to have almost forgotten I was there. No one spoke, except to say, "Pass the salt," or "Where's the butter?" I wondered if this was what dinner was going to be like, now that Judy was gone. If so, I thought I'd run away to live with Granny too. Halfway through dinner, I dropped my glass and spilled water all over my blouse. "Excuse me," I said, and it sounded way too loud as I stood up and went into the kitchen. I was just reaching for the dish towel when I heard Mother say, "There's something I need to tell you, Richard." "What?" asked Daddy. They were whispering, but I was only in the kitchen, so I could hear every word. "You know that private school, T.J. Ranney?" Mother asked. "The one Judy wanted to go to?" "Yes." "It's opening next week," said Mother. "I've been asked to teach there. Just tell them you're not interested." "No," said Mother. "I signed the contract this afternoon." Daddy started coughing. "It'd mainly be the same students I would have been teaching at Hall High." "No. And if I could help get the school started, then maybe Judy could come home," explained Mother. I crept over to the doorway. I didn't want to hear them argue, but like a moth near a candle, I couldn't pull myself away, either. Daddy shook his head. "Governor Fabius is just trying to find a way to get around the integration order. It's going back on all the progress those 9 students made last year." Mother said nothing. "You knew I wouldn't approve," said Daddy. "That's why I didn't ask you first," snapped Mother. "Sometimes I think you care about those African Americans more than your own family." Daddy slammed his fist down on the table. "That's not fair. Of course I'll miss Judy, but we have to do what's best for her education, and—" Mother stood up and walked out of the room. Daddy threw down his napkin like he was going to follow her, then changed his mind and sat with his head in his hands. I wanted to sneak off and hide under my covers, but I couldn't reach my room without going through the dining room. I considered going out the back door and climbing in my bedroom window like a burglar, but it seemed simpler to wait and see if Daddy would leave too. Finally, he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. "Marley," Daddy said automatically. "We weren't—" But I guess he realized there was no point in lying, because he sighed and said, "Sit down and finish your dinner." I didn't want to, but I didn't want to storm off like Mother either. I decided, to keep the peace, I would take the high road and go sit down, even if I couldn't eat a bite. "We're all feeling stressed, and—" Daddy rubbed his eyes. "You're probably pretty angry with me." I didn't answer. The answer to that question was yes. Daddy took a deep breath. "Do you remember when we thought Pretty Boy had died?" I wasn't in the mood for a bedtime story. Pretty Boy was singing away in the room right now, so I was pretty sure he had lived through whatever misfortune had befallen him. But Daddy wasn't deterred by my lack of interest. "You were little, maybe 4 or 5, he went on. "David let Pretty Boy out of his cage to fly around. But then, after a while, he couldn't find him. He searched everywhere. Finally he went up in the attic. There was Pretty Boy lying on the rafters in front of the attic fan. Pretty Boy was lying awful still, not moving. David picked him up and gently stroked his feathers. Nothing. There wasn't any injury he could see, but Pretty Boy didn't move. David brought him back downstairs and put him in his cage. When I came home from work, and that was where I found you all, gathered around Pretty Boy's cage, crying." I vaguely remembered that. Not that I was interested in Daddy's story, but— "You were already planning his funeral, but I wasn't sure he was dead. I've seen birds like that before, stunned, but if you left them alone long enough, they'd shake it off and be as good as new." So we put the cover on his cage and went to bed. In the morning, we took off the cover, and there was Pretty Boy standing on his perch, singing, just as pretty as he ever had. I guess what I'm trying to say is, our family is like Pretty Boy. Things might seem awful bad right now, with your new friend gone and your sister at Granny's, and Mother so angry with me, but we'll get through this. You'll see. He patted my hand. It was a nice story, but I wasn't totally sure he believed it himself. There was a knock at the front door, and Mother went to answer it. We could hear a man's voice, low and gruff, but we couldn't make out his words. "Who is it?" Daddy called out. "A policeman," said Mother, and she sounded afraid. All sorts of horrible ideas went through my head as Daddy and I ran to the front door. Maybe David had been in a car accident. Maybe Judy had run away. Or maybe the policeman was here to arrest me for trying to contact Liz. Daddy had warned me to leave her alone, and I hadn't listened. "Actually," said the man, "I'm a federal marshal." Sure enough, he had an armband that read U.S. Marshal and held up a badge with an eagle on it for all of us to see. "Does Miss Lillian Marie Nisbet live here?" "Yes," said Mother. "That's me." He handed her an envelope with a golden seal. "This is a restraining order forbidding you from working at T.J. Ranney High School." I I don't understand," stammered Mother. "There is a current contract on file placing you at Hall High School. You need to honor that contract." Mother took the envelope, but didn't move to open it. "Oh. Do you understand, ma'am?" the man asked. "You are not to teach at T.J. Ranney. This is an order from the federal government, which supersedes any state laws. You need to remain at your old school, even if there aren't any students." "I understand." The Mother didn't look at him. The marshal tipped his hat. "Good night, then. Sorry to bother you." He turned and left our front porch. Mother stood perfectly still in the hallway. Daddy opened his mouth, then closed it again. I went back to the dining room. The silence was horrible, and I found myself wishing for the yelling. Thoughts were bouncing around my head like the balls in a pinball machine, and I didn't want to hear any of them. Was Mother going to get arrested? Were my parents going to keep fighting? When was Judy going to come home? Will Liz show up tomorrow afternoon? I scraped all the leftovers into the trash and focused on doing the dishes, scrubbing each plate in clockwise circles. The area of each plate was pi times the radius squared. If I thought about that hard enough, I wouldn't have to worry about anything else. In the middle of the night, I woke up hungry. I decided to go into the kitchen and make myself a bowl of cereal and milk. But when I got halfway down the hall, I heard crying. I peeked into the kitchen. It was Mother sitting at the table holding a cup of tea. Parents were not supposed to cry. They weren't supposed to fight either, and sisters weren't supposed to be sent away. And if your friend was white, she should stay white and not suddenly turn out to be African American. I wanted to comfort Mother, but I didn't know what to say. For a long while, I just stood in the hall and listened to her crying and thought, what if Pretty Boy hadn't woken up? What if flying into the fan had killed him? Daddy had said sometimes birds shook off a collision and sometimes they didn't. Which one would it be for us? I crept back into my room and I picked up the drape over the birdcage. Pretty Boy was sitting on his perch, his tiny chest moving up and down, and I whispered, "Please don't die." Then I let down the drape and went back to bed.